Welcome. My name is Alexander. I'm going to talk about, well, how to use GitLab, and in specific GitLab CI, to deploy an application to your Kubernetes cluster. First of all, as I already said, my name is Alexander. I'm working at Cloudical in Berlin. And besides, well, working, I'm doing a lot of open source stuff. Well, for the company obviously too, but maybe you've heard about Rook. It's a project where you can run storage in Kubernetes, and also other open source projects in general. Okay. So basically the title slide again, but with the difference that, well, with a subtitle, which basically says, or Natsubi's guide, which will translate to apprentice guide to using GitLab CI with multi-stage environments with Kubernetes and running containers with just one click. Kind of backstory to that subtitle is that at the time I originally made my first presentation there about GitLab CI and deploying to Kubernetes was when I was an apprentice at a company. So I kind of more or less find this fitting as I'm running something like this in my private environment. So yeah. So what does the WYNTK mean? What you need to know, it's not going too much in depth, even though there's a full GitHub repository from my side where you have like, it should get you started with everything. There's even like 100 links to the GitLab documentation if there's anything that you haven't, that isn't done in this example project. So yeah. Before diving into the GitLab CI part, maybe kind of like a short quote from a Greek DevOps guy. Applikationos deployimus agilus aptu containero. Maybe you've heard it already, but well, it's basically about being agile and deploying containers. Continuous integration and continuous delivery. Not to try to go too much into the discussion of what both of those, like in comparison and all, like mean in the end, but summarized, the integration part, at least for me, most of the time is I'll have tests and so on, trying to, well, integrate my application with, for example, other APIs that I'm talking to, and in itself doing tests against the application, making sure it's still working as it should. And the delivery part for me is, well, to deliver the application then, for example, to a Kubernetes cluster, to then from dev stage, QA stage, and live stage, for example. So, as said, my situation was basically I have my Kubernetes cluster, I have my GitLab running, and I have some repositories. And GitLab CI comes in there perfectly handy as it allows me to just push my changes, my code changes, have the GitLab CI, test the application in the first few steps, already make sure that it's working, then build it up, well, depending on how you do your Docker images with so-called multi-stage building, you can even just do the application build inside the actual container building. But in the end, we have testing, we have where the Docker image is built, and then after the image build as a node, obviously also pushing it somewhere that I can access it and later on run it on my Kubernetes. Between GitLab and Kubernetes there, more or less, there's a, well, loving relationship if you want so. Also, from the beginning on, GitLab had an integration where you could specify a configuration for a Kubernetes cluster, where you could already with ease from your project just deploy to one Kubernetes cluster. This Well, as it's just one Kubernetes cluster, is probably for the most people not enough there. but it's at least a start, depending on how your environment looks. That, for example, if you have just one Kubernetes cluster for like every stage, dev, QA, and live, or if you even have a QA stage, it may definitely look differently, that you only need one Kubernetes cluster. So, in the end, with the GitLab and the GitLab CI and the integration part for Kubernetes, it basically ends up in a love situation, where it's easy, you press one button, or you just push, and the change is automatically built, and even which I will also showcase, it will, when I create a pull request, or a merge request, depending on what term you want to use, I get a preview of my changes. That is pretty good. I can just push my changes, well, wait a few minutes maybe, depending on how long tests and everything is going, and then quickly see, like, for example, I'm changing the background from red to blue. I would instantly, when I'm opening DPR, get a link to my application where I can directly see, oh, yeah, it's looking good right now. It's now as it should be, it is blue now. So, now to finally dive into the parts that we learn about GitLab CI and, well, a bit of GitLab here too. First part is the CI files. For GitLab and GitLab CI, they have, well, a YAML file in the repositories. It can be individual per repository, which is good. Which, well, it has advantages and disadvantages, obviously. If you have 500 projects which use the same GitLab YAML, which contains the instruction for the CI, it's kind of code duplicating. But, well, there are also ways around this. Yeah, so the second part is pipelines and jobs. What those are in GitLab. Next part would be environments in GitLab, which, for example, allow you that you have, well, per stage gen, depending on how you want to do it, one button to rollback and to, rollback, for example, to an older application version or even to a more up-to-date. You have the CI runners, which is more or less just a kind of detail that you have somewhere which the actual CI steps will be run. The Kubernetes integration, or well, the Kubernetes cluster part of GitLab, and the app review part, which I just meant like with the, if you create like a merge request or a pull request, you get like a URL, you click, or I think it's even a nice button in the pull request, you click it and you get like a preview of what your application looks now. For the Kubernetes part, we'll kind of quickly make a discourse to what are service objects, what are Ingress objects, what is a deployment. Those are kind of like the three main objects, if you will, so that I'm going to use at least for my example application. Okay, so starting with the GitLab part. I hope it's visible enough, but, well, it's YAML code, so just think yourself a few lines with some information on it, on what the CI should do. Basically, you describe stages. You say what stages should exist, like, for example, test, build, and deploy. Then, for each stage, you can specify multiple steps that should be done. Like in this kind of cutoff example, we have like in a stage test, just a step called test, which would run go test on my code. In my case, it's a Golang application, but for other, well, Java test command could be run. But let's say I have more than just for go test to run. Let's say I want to run linting and so on my Go code in this example. I would just specify a new block and say stage test in it, and then, for example, specify my linter run on my code, basically. Which, well, it's easily extendable if you need, for example, as I said, like a linter or other tests, whatever you want there. Then, for example, the compile step in the case how I'm building the example, I'm building the application more or less try to have like a separate step of building the application besides actually building the Docker image, which is also in the build stage. And the third stage then, which isn't on here, will basically deploy, depending on what branch or well even what tag is possible. We'll deploy it either to live, so basically to the main URL, or to to review or other possibilities there. So to summarize what I just said, you have the GitLab CI YAML, which is simply containing the instructions for the CI. You said what stages it should use. You said some additional information like what each of the steps in the stages should do and what container image will be used for the step. That's an important part there. Docker images, or well, container image, let's keep it a bit more general. GitLab CI uses container image, so you have a reproducible environment for your building. So if normally, you build your application, it fails for whatever reason. You don't know why. It doesn't look like you've made a typo somewhere. So, it should have been a typo, should have been caught in the normal test part, for example, before the building even starts. Then you could just run the GitLab CI as it is, this step locally, which would possibly allow you to quickly just jump into the container and, play around in it and debug why is it not working? Why is my application right now in this container image as it is not compiling? Maybe you see, oh, my build container that I've used there, for example, is outdated, or there's like a library missing that I don't install during my actual build preparations or something like that. These are the possibilities with the GitLab CI file there. Coming to pipelines. Well, pipelines are basically just the object in GitLab summarizing that if I make my change, that it runs from my code coming in, which we can see basically at those 4 check marks there, because I have 4 stages, so that it runs through each stage. And when it's, in the end green, I have done did a good job and, have correctly, in case, for example, this is a tag. In this case, it means that the latest live has been deployed with this version then. There again, we kind of come back to the GitLab CI YAML there, that through the stages we have defined there, I have defined for tags that when a tag is made, that it should then deploy to live. Which, in my case, there is automatically. You can also have it manually. If you're, not confident enough in your application yet, in regards to if I run, for example, with a Golang application, if I run my Go test and maybe also other API testing or something, whatever the application does, and I'm not sure after the tests that if I have run those tests and they're not green, then it's hopefully, obviously, a failure in the application. But when it's green in the end, then I should hopefully have the confidence for my application that I can just run it through to live. Doing something like this, if you have especially microservices, it's getting more complicated. Then, to be honest, even something like GitLab CI is, something like GitLab CI is a bit, maybe not the right tool, to put it like that. Just the right tool to possibly test the application, to build your container image, and then push it in a registry. But to have a staged rollout or something similar, like canary deployment or whatever you want to call, all the methods that you can, that you have for deploying an application, it's getting simply more and more complicated there. So as I said, GitLab CI is, depending on how far you're going with it, perfect for doing a bit of smaller things, even for bigger things too. But simply just from thinking about it, at a certain level, it's it's a bit getting more complicated. As I said, if you have 10 teams and all different API and all different application you need to talk to, then you may there's simply some other tools which may handle this better. Okay. Nice thing there with the pipelines in GitLab is you get a nice visualization, which is cool because I can clearly see I have my test and test 2 steps in the testing stage, which, for example, in the test one part, basically, it's doing like my Go testing, and in the test 2, I think it's a dummy right now, but would do, for example, meta-linting or something like code linting again. To have it in parallel. Then in my case, I still have a build, compile step happening, and I have a release part where the image is built. As a demonstration, I had integrated like that. You build the application, and after that, it's also getting pushed to a min.io, to a S3 instance, just so that kind of like the GitLab has artifacts functionality, but if you run it at a certain scale with, I don't know, like, let's say thousands of users wanting to download like the newest binaries, it's probably a bit better also from security-wise to, have a min.io or something like a different store for such artifacts. Yeah. And in the last part, we have deploy dev and deploy live dev and deploy live steps, which mean that in this case, at the time of creating a screenshot, I have deployed to live and to dev. In this case, it was, where do we have it? It also again has the information like it says here, this run is running on like version 1.0, or something. So did I again have an overview on what pipeline did what in the end? Well, as we're talking about Git, I could just click like the Git commit and jump into what is going on. Okay, well, again, the stages. To more or less show a bit bigger example there, as I already said, like with the testing, you have your coverage tests or whatever, your normal testing, your linting of the application, you have your build process, and then you take the build application and put it into a Docker image, or you just do everything in one step where you build your application and build the Docker image. And for example, then also create like a release tar and even upload this release tar. And the bigger part here is GitLab CI also allows manual steps, which means that I could, before I deploy to live, if I'm, well, for example, not completely confident yet in the application with the testing, like this needs to be built if it's not done. If there are not like 100 tests or 100% coverage, this more and more takes time. So, but the point is, we have a manual interaction point. You can say, hey, automatically, for example, deploy to dev, but only if I press this button, deploy it to live. So, environments. Environments are more or less kind of like, it would reflect something like live and dev and QA environments, depending on how you do it. Which means that, depending on how the setup would be done for you, you have a possibility that if you deploy from your GitLab CI pipeline to this environment, you can specify that in your GitLab CI YAML. We can go later over that again. Which basically means that if I deploy, for example, my new changes as version 1.012 or something on in the live environment, but I previously also already had deployed like 1.011, I could with one click go ahead and, for example, redeploy even an older version, but also redeploy or rollback, if we will, so to an older version that I have. I think that's also exactly the case that this, for example, is the 1.0 1.0.13 version and the above entries for the 1.0.14, which means that in this case, this is in one environment, meaning that I can just click redeploy and it would automatically go through the CI process again for 1.0.13 and I would be back to this version. GitLab CI runners, they watch the GitLab for jobs to do, for steps to run. They are simply, most of the time, separated from the GitLab itself for performance reasons. They, as I said, they take on like the information, the build jobs in the end, start the Docker containers and so on for it, and run the commands that are specified. That, for example, then the Docker image and so on is built. And coming to the Kubernetes integration part, which is more or less now called Kubernetes Cluster feature. It was a nice time, but it was kind of improved. Kind of more or less a two-sided sword, though, to be honest here, that they improved it to have like a separate part. You can specify more than one Kubernetes cluster per project now. The downside is, do you have a few pictures of them? Oh, sorry. You can only specify one Kubernetes cluster in the community edition, which, you can like it or not. It's just kind of a, hey, watch out that if you don't have like the GitLab something edition and not like the community edition, then you need to watch out for that you can only have one Kubernetes cluster at a time per project. Basically you have like a form where you can input the information to the Kubernetes cluster. Besides that, you could, it also has like an integration with the Google Cloud Platform, where you can, just log in with your credentials and click a button, specify probably also some details, and GitLab/GCP would then spin up a Kubernetes cluster for you, and GitLab would directly be able to access the Kubernetes cluster in GCP there. Okay, coming to app review part. App review part is basically, as I said, like I create a merge request in GitLab. What it does, it looks a slightly bit different in the latest GitLab version, but in the end it boils down to I have this link, which is now a nice little button. I could click it, and if I would click it, a new tab would open, and I would see the current application of the state of this merge request deployed there. You need to have the setup, for example, that this DNS record here would point to your Kubernetes cluster in a way with like Ingress, which we're coming back to in the Kubernetes part of this talk. But in the end, I create my merge request. In the background, the application is being built and all, and it's being deployed. So then I quickly take a look, see, did my change work? Did I completely break it? And does it in like, especially for UI things, does it break like on mobile and so on? So let's go over the list. We have the CI file YAML, which is a YAML file with the instructions for the GitLab CI. We have pipelines and jobs, which are more or less just like we put something in, we get something out in the end. Environments, which are kind of like trying to mimic the live dev and QA if you do it correctly from when you actually also deploy to them, that you have a point in GitLab where you can roll back or even roll forward if you want. We have the CI runners, as they're doing the heavy lifting in regards to executing the steps and so the steps of the stages in on certain servers then where the runners are running. Then there's the Kubernetes cluster integration, and one part which I haven't touched on there is manifests, which I'm coming back to in the Kubernetes part now. We have, a nice little diagram up right now. These Kubernetes manifests are basically the definitions of Kubernetes objects. Meaning that, for example, I would specify the information required for such a service object in, a service.yaml or something, so that I can simply deploy it from my GitLab CI pipeline. more on that when I'm going to the demonstration. So let's go into the service object for a minute. A service object is a way in Kubernetes to make like an IP available, or well, reserve it if you will so, to kind of hide or like load balancing. I think I would, well, I would not call it load balancing directly, but I get an IP plus a DNS name inside the Kubernetes cluster from which I can reach one or more pods. And quick point to pods, a pod is one or more containers in the end. More on that, like I said, if you haven't heard about pods yet, just think about it as it's a container there. Meaning that when I create a service, I give it like a selector with, say, hey, select the pods that have the label app is my cool app, and another label component frontend, for example. Then I would get a service, an IP in Kubernetes, well, an address which I can reach. When I connect to it, I get to one of the pods behind the service. There's a bit more logic than that behind it, but to keep it simple, you have one address, it's basically load balanced to multiple containers that you have running there. Continuing on to Ingress. An Ingress is basically also like a load balancer, if you will so, but on the HTTP level. In that part, that is a so-called Ingress load balancer, Ingress controller, however you want to name it, is the part that is reachable from the internet, where you point all the DNS addresses from outside to the Ingress controller, and the Ingress controller can then, based on the based on SNI server name identification, what was it? Well, based on a name, you try to talk with it, differentiate between which service in the end in Kubernetes you want to talk to, and then redirect you to the right service then, which in the end ends up at your container that you deployed. Quick part about deployments. Deployments are kind of like a meta object, yeah, let's call it meta object, which covers kind of like logics. If you change something in this deployment, like history and so on, meaning that if we would update this deployment, like the deployment object in itself runs containers for you. It takes care of, if you specify in the deployment object that it should have 2 containers running with this and this configuration, the deployment would take care of running then those 2 replicas, basically those 2 containers that you want in the Kubernetes cluster. The part which I've just kind of added here, the replica set part, is kind of like a history for deployments. But it's, in the end, we have an object, we specify the configuration for the containers in it, and based on that, the deployment will create pods, so run our containers in the Kubernetes cluster. So let's quickly go over the whole thing. With Ingress, we have service and deployments. And now we're jumping into the demo time. So if you want to kind of, well, it's a one-page site with not really too much information, but if you want to go to the page, you feel free to do so. So where's my shell? So, okay. Let me just make the, what was the piece one? Okay, so. All right, I should go to my repository. So, as I already mentioned in the beginning for a second there, which will also later be shown on the slide, so don't worry, you can type off the address or copy it, or take a screenshot, well, a photo of the slide with the address to that. The repository, which I'm going to use here as an example, is available on GitHub. You can basically just, well, pull it and push it into your GitLab, and modify it as you need. So, if I'm finding my mouse cursor again, so perfect. So, I'm in the repository now. What I'm going to do is, let's go ahead, change up, what do we want to do? Let's say, yeah, I really made a typo there, kind of like, let's remove the Golang from the hello text. We save it. Quick part here. This is the application asset. This is the live address right now. You see it still says hello Golang DevOps conference. We just changed it from hello Golang and so on. We changed it to just hello DevOps conference. So what we're going to do is we check the change in. Before that I need to go to another branch. What is a good name? Typo fix. So we go ahead and commit the whole thing. Fix typo in main.go. Please use better descriptions though than I am doing right now. So our change is committed. Let's go ahead and push it. I think my SSH session is broken here, come on. Just a second. My GPG key is locked there. Okay, so. No, come on. So we need to type that again. I said, my bad. Forgot to unlock my keys. Fixed typo in main.go. So go ahead. Well, I need to fix that setup sometime. So we go ahead and, we need to set, what did we call it? Typo fix, right? So we push it up. In my case, I'm ignoring the SSH known host as I'm, messing with my GitLab right now. Don't do that. Be sure where to push your stuff. So let's refresh. Well, the change isn't appearing for that. So let me bring up the GitLab. So just refresh the page. So what we see here now is basically that I have, my nice create merge request button. Let's go ahead, create our merge request, delete, yes, create. So, and already before I have created the PR, it has started to build my branch in that case, build my changes, so let's just jump into that. In this case, as I said, it's a Golang application, so in this case, GoTest is downloading all the necessary modules, all the files that we need there. So, should be done any second, hopefully. Nah. The internet is a bit, perfect, now it's done. I think I'm the worst example with the example application because I don't even have any tests verifying that my application is really working. But in the end, I at least ran Go test on it and didn't have any typos with that on it, in it. So if we just go to the pipeline, which makes it easier to view the whole thing, now we're at the compile part. And after that, the image is being built. I'm already jumping a bit ahead here to the deploy review. So as I already said, what is happening right now is I'm building the application, I'm testing it and all, building my Docker image. In this case, even I'm pushing the image into the GitLab registry, which, quick point here, this is it's not GitLab.com, it's just a private GitLab instance basically. So what's happening in the background is there that when the image is built, it's getting pushed to this registry. And then afterwards, in this step, which I already jumped to, the deploy review, it's going ahead and deploying my changes, my Docker image to my Kubernetes cluster in a second. So, which should hopefully start when the Docker image has finally been built. Let's just take a look. The build is already done. The image build is also already done. Where do we have it? Review. So now my internet is a bit slow on my laptop. But now what is happening? It's running through basically it has a configuration now on how it can access a Kubernetes cluster. So either you just use, which I would not recommend, something like kubectl, which is the client with which you can talk with Kubernetes. What I would recommend you is look at templating tools like Helm or, hopefully when they have removed the tiller, am I right? Look at, simply templating tools which make it easier to share those definitions, those object definitions from Kubernetes between the projects that you have. Because normally if you have one project running on Kubernetes, there's definitely at least 500 more following soon. So, yeah. So quickly, the output here is, as I said, like nothing else than creating the configuration, quickly checking, are we able to talk with the Kubernetes API, and then, some templating, SED. Some of you may have heard about it. This is a perfect templating tool. And after that, we just use those templated object manifests for Kubernetes and apply them against the Kubernetes API. So now that I've talked almost forever with the pipeline part here, you can even have desktop notifications. I'm not a fan of that though. So what I'm having here now, it hasn't been deployed. And we have a few app buttons. And because I'm not having a wildcard certificate yet, we're just going to jump in. Yeah, I know. So, and what do we have? Application branch typo fix is currently deployed on a separate address. Hope it's visible enough. It's at least not live minus. It's at least not live. No, come on. It's at least not live minus presentation, GitLab KDS, and so on. So we at least, depending on how I see it, we already have like a separation there. And I could now go ahead, review, talk with the API if there would be any, and make sure that it works. So let's say we go ahead. And are we sure we want to merge this change? I'm not confident in the comment message though, but let's go ahead and merge it. So what has happened now? We have merged this change into master. We directly also get the input that, hey, there's a pipeline now running on master, meaning that it will go through all the process again, like test again, and build the application, build the Docker image, and after that, deploy to review. One step ahead. It will deploy to review because we obviously, depending on how you develop your application, maybe don't want your master branch to be like the live thing the users are seeing. So what we're going to do after that, or we can already do it right now. So we have to change merge to master. We need to create a new tag. As it's simply depending on how your structure in the company is. If you're like, well, master is fine to be live, or actual tags that you made from time to time are live. So I'm going to choose, come on, let's be disruptive, 1.10. So we have created a tag. Let's just go ahead and push the tag. Yeah. And we have pushed the tag. And even though currently master is basically being built and deployed then, if we go to the tag, there we go, we're going to see that it's then finally being deployed to live. So, as this may take a minute or two, I'm gonna try to find my slides again. There we go. A few more points thrown into to kind of have a good mix of, hey, there's even more when you have it in Kubernetes also. There's a project called Prometheus Operator. Maybe in the question to the round, who knows about Prometheus? Yeah. No? Short explanation, Prometheus is a monitoring tool with a lot of libraries for different languages. And main part here is that you could also automatically have the Prometheus pick up your application. So you deploy it as a container to Kubernetes, and it will automatically be picked up. And for example, then the slash metrics or whatever you use as the address for these Prometheus metrics, for these metrics of your applications, that you can simply get them and check, for example, also not only by looking at it, but also seeing from the metric side, is there a new memory leak or something going on? That is also possible. One note, especially for the Java guys in the room, who's using Java for their applications? No? I should have asked for Spring Boot users, but for Spring Boot especially, they use, I think it was called Micrometer, where you add like 2 or 3 lines to your application YAML, and with that you get instantly like metrics, like at least from the Spring Boot components itself, like metrics directly, which is pretty cool. So as a heads up, it's pretty easy to integrate. There won't be a rollback demo because we haven't even rolled forward. But again, as I've shown, in the end we have like cool button where it says redeploy or rollback in the GitLab UI, which allows us to do so. So, okay, let's take a look. It should hopefully be almost done now. In this case, I wasn't confident enough in the application. I need to press a button. So I'm going to do that. Let's take a look at the output. No, come on. Oh, perfect. So now the CI runner will start the stuff, and we will now, if we go to the, if we go to the page here, I hope some of you are still on it. They're still, almost done the rollout. Come on. And it's done. So, you probably noticed that it says version 1.01. There's a document, who doesn't have such a situation? There's a document which says, if you release it, please change the number version in these files. I have read this document when I created this repository. So still, point standing, we are on the branch 1.10. So we have now deployed our latest tag with manual interaction for the actual deployment to Kubernetes, which now everyone can access. So as if you would go to an empty page here. If you would go to this now, you would see this 1.10 release. Okay. So. Huh? The deploy part? You simply add it to the repository in GitLab. It's here, let me quickly pull it up. If you go to the project, there we go. Here, it's... Nah, come on. Yeah, it's you just add this GitLab CI YAML into your repository, and that's it. You can see it in the repository online. It's Where do we have it? So, well, it's too much lines for me to make it more visible, but as said, it's all available in a GitHub repository. So don't worry, you can see those files for yourself again. Yeah, as I said, like this is a pretty crude method, but more or less it's about demonstrating that you can do such stuff even with other tools there. So keep that in mind. Okay, quick quote here from Scott Henselman. The most powerful tool we have as developers is automation. That's the main kind of point of my presentation, my talk, whatever you want to call it here. That I push my change, it gets built, it gets automatically rolled out to the cluster. That's the point here. Well, there was a single interaction point, yes, when we wanted to deploy it to live, but even that, just remove this line from the GitLab CI YAML, and it would just automatically run through. You don't have to do anything. So, yeah. Now we're coming exactly to the part. If you want to look at the files and all again, you can just go to my blog. At least right now, the latest post has a direct link to the GitHub. Otherwise, if you go to, well, let me always give it one ahead. If you go to my GitHub, github.com/galaxyrt, if you search, or I have it on my profile even. There's a repository called presentation-gitlab-k8s. It's containing all those files with even some more explanation in the README and so on. So feel free to check it out, and yeah. That's it.